The year was 1964, in a dimly lit boxing gym on the outskirts of Oakland, California. The heavy bags swung lazily in the stale air, and the smell of sweat and leather hung thick like a warning. What happened inside those walls over the next few minutes would never make the newspapers. There would be no police report, no hospital records, no official documentation of any kind. And yet among those who were there, trainers, fighters, a handful of onlookers who had wandered in from the street, the story would be passed down for decades. Spoken in low voices, always with the same mixture of disbelief and awe. This is one of those stories. It begins with a young Chinese man, 23 years old, walking through the front door of a place where he clearly did not belong. Bruce Lee had been in Oakland for only a few months. He was not yet famous. He had no films to his name, no television appearances, no international reputation. He was simply a martial arts instructor with a small school and a growing circle of students, some of whom happened to be white, black, and Latino, a fact that had already earned him enemies within the traditional Chinese martial arts community. But this gym was not Chinese territory. This was a boxer's world. The man who ran the place was a former professional heavyweight named Earl Rollins. Rollins had fought 32 professional bouts in the 1950s, winning 26 of them, 17 by knockout. His hands were thick and scarred, his nose flattened from years of punishment, and his voice carried the kind of authority that came from having put men on the canvas for a living. When Bruce Lee walked in that afternoon, Rollins barely looked up from the speed bag he was working. But someone else did. His name was Victor Galindo, a cruiserweight with a 14-2 record and a reputation for ending fights early. Galindo was 28 years old, 6 feet tall, and carried 205 pounds of dense, ring-tested muscle. He had grown up in East Los Angeles, learned to fight in the streets before he ever learned to fight in a gym, and had little patience for what he considered circus acts. And to Galindo, that is exactly what Bruce Lee appeared to be. Lee had come to the gym at the invitation of a mutual acquaintance, a trainer who had seen him demonstrate some techniques at a local yimka and thought Rollins might be interested in a conversation. Perhaps a collaboration, perhaps something more. But Galindo saw only a small Chinese man in a black silk jacket standing in the doorway like he had wandered into the wrong building. For a long moment, no one spoke. Bruce Lee's eyes moved slowly across the room, not nervously, not cautiously, but with the calm precision of someone cataloging exits, distances, and potential threats. His posture was relaxed, his hands hung loosely at his sides. To anyone unfamiliar with combat, he might have looked completely at ease. To anyone who understood violence, he looked like something else entirely. Galindo stepped away from the heavy bag he had been working. He pulled off his gloves and tossed them onto a nearby bench. Then he walked directly toward the visitor, stopping less than 3 feet away. "You lost, little man." Bruce Lee did not step back. He did not blink. "I was invited," he said simply. Galindo smiled, not with amusement, but with the slow, predatory grin of a man who had found his entertainment for the afternoon. "Invited," he repeated. "To do what?" "Show us your little karate moves." A few of the other fighters in the gym had stopped what they were doing. The rhythm of the space, the thudding of bags, the skip of ropes, the shuffle of feet on canvas had fallen silent. "I teach Kung Fu," Lee said. His voice was calm, almost soft. "If you're curious, I would be happy to explain the difference." Galindo laughed. It was a short, sharp sound filled with contempt. "Kung Fu," he said, mocking the pronunciation. "That the stuff with the flying kicks and the funny noises." He turned to the room, playing to his audience. "Eh? Maybe he can break a board for us." "You bring any boards, little man?" Bruce Lee said nothing. His silence seemed to irritate Galindo more than any response could have. The gym had grown completely still. Even the overhead fans seemed to slow their lazy rotations, casting long, sweeping shadows across the concrete floor. Galindo took another step forward. He was close enough now that Bruce Lee could smell the sweat on him, could see the old scar tissue above his left eye, could count the veins standing out on his forearms. "You know what I think?" Galindo said, his voice dropping lower. "I think you're one of those guys who makes a living fooling people. Teaching housewives and accountants how to feel tough. Charging them money for fairy tales." He leaned in closer. "I think you're a pathetic clown." The words hung in the air. A few of the younger fighters exchanged glances. Earl Rollins had stopped working the speed bag and was watching now, his thick arms folded across his chest. Bruce Lee remained motionless. His expression had not changed, his breathing had not quickened. He simply stood there absorbing the insult the way a stone absorbs rain. And then Galindo did something that would define the next 4 seconds of his life. He spat. The glob of saliva struck Bruce Lee on the chest, darkening the black silk of his jacket. It was a gesture of absolute contempt, the kind of disrespect that, in certain worlds, was answered only one way. For a fraction of a moment, nothing happened. Galindo smirked, turning his head slightly toward the other fighters, ready to accept their laughter, their approval. He never saw it coming. Bruce Lee's right hand moved first, not as a punch, but as a straight blast, a centerline strike that traveled no more than 6 inches from its starting position to Galindo's throat. The speed was something no one in that room had ever witnessed. It did not look like an attack. It looked like a magic trick, like the hand had simply teleported from one position to another. The impact was precise, not a crushing blow but a shock to the trachea. Enough to freeze the nervous system, enough to stop the breath, enough to make the body forget for one critical instant how to function. Galindo's eyes went wide. Before he could react, before he could raise his hands or step back or do anything at all, Bruce Lee's left hand was already in motion. It came across in a short, hooking arc and struck Galindo on the right temple. Not with a fist, but with the bottom of the palm, the heel of the hand. A blow designed to rattle the brain inside the skull without breaking the bones of the attacker's fingers. Galindo staggered. His legs were still trying to hold him up, but the signals from his brain were scrambled now, delayed, confused. He looked like a man trying to walk on a ship's deck during a storm. Bruce Lee did not pause. He did not admire his work. He did not wait to see if his opponent would recover. His right leg came up in a short, sharp arc, a low kick aimed not at the head or the body, but at the side of Galindo's left knee. The impact was surgical. The joint buckled inward at an angle it was never designed to bend. Galindo collapsed. He went down hard, his shoulder striking the concrete floor, his mouth open in a silent scream. The pain in his knee had not yet fully registered in his conscious mind, but his body knew. His body understood that something fundamental had been broken. 4 seconds. That was all it had taken. 4 seconds from the moment the saliva left Galindo's lips to the moment he lay crumpled on the ground, gasping for air, clutching his knee, unable to rise. The gym was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The younger fighters stared with their mouths open, trying to process what they had just seen. Earl Rollins had unfolded his arms and taken a single step forward, his eyes fixed on the small Chinese man standing in the center of the room. Bruce Lee had not broken a sweat. His breathing was unchanged. His jacket was still stained with Galindo's spit, but he made no move to wipe it away. He looked down at the fallen boxer for a long moment. "Gung Fu," he said quietly. "It's not about flying kicks." Then he turned and looked directly at Earl Rollins. The old heavyweight met his gaze. Something passed between them in that silence. Not hostility, not fear, but recognition. The recognition of one predator assessing another. Rollins nodded slowly. "Someone get Vic some ice," he said without taking his eyes off Bruce Lee. "And somebody else get this man a chair." No one rushed to help Galindo for a long, uncomfortable moment. The fallen boxer remained exactly where he was, curled on his side, one hand pressed against his damaged knee, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The other fighters watched him, but none of them moved. It was as if they were afraid that any sudden motion might draw the attention of the man still standing in the center of the room. Finally, one of the younger trainers, a wary man in his 40s with a towel draped over his shoulder, broke from the group and knelt beside Galindo. He spoke in low tones, trying to assess the damage, trying to determine whether this was a hospital situation or merely a bag of ice situation. Bruce Lee did not watch. He had already shifted his attention to Earl Rollins, who had gestured toward a bench near the far wall. Lee walked to it without hurry, his footsteps light and nearly silent on the concrete floor. He sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and waited. Rollins approached slowly. He pulled a metal folding chair from against the wall, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. He set it down across from Lee and lowered himself into it, the chair groaning under his weight. For a moment, neither man spoke. Rollins studied his visitor with the careful attention of someone who had spent his life reading opponents. He noted the relaxed shoulders, the loose hands resting on the knees, the steady rhythm of the breathing. He noted the way Lee's eyes moved, not nervously, not scanning for threats, but simply observing, cataloging, filing away information for future use. You've done that before, Rollins said finally. It was not a question.
Yes.
How many times? Bruce Lee considered the question. Enough to know when it's necessary. Rollins grunted. He reached into his pocket and produced a pack of cigarettes, shook one loose, and lit it with a battered Zippo. The flame illuminated the deep lines of his face, the old scars, the flattened bridge of his nose. Vic has got a big mouth, he said, exhaling smoke. Always has, but he's not a bad fighter. 14-2. 17 knockouts between pro and amateur. Fast hands. Good instincts. He paused, letting the cigarette burn between his fingers. You put him down in 4 seconds, maybe less. Bruce Lee said nothing. I've been in this game for 20 years, Rollins continued. I've seen heavyweights fight heavyweights, cruiserweights fight cruiserweights. I've seen guys who could take a punch like it was nothing, and guys who could throw a punch like God's own hammer. I've seen speed, and I've seen power, and I've seen men who had both. He leaned forward slightly. I've never seen anything like what you just did. The words hung in the air between them. From across the room came the sound of Galindo groaning as 2 men helped him to his feet, his left leg hanging useless, unable to bear weight. What I practice is not boxing, Lee said quietly. It is not meant for rounds or referees or rules. It is meant to end a confrontation as quickly and efficiently as possible. I can see that your friend will need to see a doctor. The knee is not broken, but the ligaments are damaged. He will walk again, but not for several weeks. And he should not fight for at least 6 months. Rollins absorbed this information without visible reaction. He took another drag from his cigarette and let the smoke drift upward toward the ceiling. You came here for a reason, he said. Tommy said you wanted to talk. So talk. Bruce Lee nodded slowly. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his thighs, his hands loosely open. I am building something, he said. A school. A system. A way of teaching martial arts that breaks from tradition. I do not believe in preserving techniques simply because they are old. I believe in testing them, refining them, keeping what works, and discarding what does not. He paused. I have been told that you train fighters who think the same way. Rollins raised an eyebrow. Who told you that? People talk. I listen. The old heavyweight studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. You've got balls, I'll give you that. Walking into a boxing gym, putting down one of my guys, and then asking for a favor. I am not asking for a favor, Lee said. I am proposing an exchange. What kind of exchange? Bruce Lee smiled for the first time since he had entered the building. I will teach you what I know, and you will teach me what you know. The room had grown quieter still. The other fighters had stopped pretending not to listen. Even Galindo, now propped against the wall with a bag of ice pressed to his knee, was watching through pain-narrowed eyes. Rollins said nothing for a long time. He finished his cigarette, crushed it under his heel, and stared at the small Chinese man sitting across from him. There's something you're not telling me, he said finally. Bruce Lee's smile faded. Yes. What is it? Lee's eyes moved to the door, then back to Rollins. There are people who do not want me to teach, he said. People who believe I am betraying my culture by sharing these methods with outsiders. They have already sent messages. Warnings. He paused. Soon they will send more than messages. Rollins did not respond immediately. He reached for another cigarette, then seemed to think better of it. His hand dropped back to his knee, and he sat there in silence, processing what he had just heard. You're telling me you've got people coming for you, he said finally. Chinese people, martial arts people. Yes, and you walked into my gym, a stranger's gym, and started a fight with one of my best guys, knowing that you've already got enemies lined up waiting to take a shot at you. Bruce Lee's expression did not change. I did not start the fight. You didn't walk away from it either. No, I did not. Rollins leaned back in his chair. The metal frame creaked beneath him. He looked across the room at Galindo, who was being helped toward the back office by 2 of the younger fighters, his face pale, his jaw clenched against the pain. Vic is going to want a rematch, Rollins said. When his knee heals, he's not the type to let something like this go. I understand. Do you? Rollins turned back to face him. Because what I saw today, that wasn't a fight. That was an execution. You took him apart like he was nothing, like he was a beginner. And Vic Galindo is a lot of things, but he is not a beginner. Bruce Lee remained silent. So here's what I'm trying to figure out, Rollins continued. If you can do that to a professional fighter, a man who's been training his whole life, who's been in the ring with killers, then why do you need me? Why do you need anyone? It was the question Lee had been waiting for. He stood up slowly, not to intimidate, not to assert dominance, but simply to move. He walked a few paces toward the center of the room, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows across his face. What I did to your fighter, he said, I can do to almost anyone. One opponent, perhaps two, in close quarters, with no rules, no time limits, no referee to stop the action. I am confident in my abilities. He turned to face Rollins. But what is coming is not one opponent. The words settled into the room like smoke. How many? Rollins asked. I do not know. 5, perhaps 10, perhaps more, and they're all trained like you. Some of them have trained longer than I have been alive. Some of them have killed before, not in competition, not in sport. In reality, Rollins exhaled slowly. He had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize when someone was telling the truth, and the man standing before him was not exaggerating. He was not seeking sympathy. He was simply stating facts. When? Rollins asked. Soon. Weeks, maybe less. And you're planning to fight them all alone? Bruce Lee smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I am planning to survive. There is a difference. He walked back toward the bench and sat down again, his movements fluid and unhurried. He looked at Rollins with an expression that was almost curious, as if he were studying a puzzle he had not yet solved. You asked why I need you, Lee said. The answer is simple. I am fast. I am precise. I understand angles and distance and timing better than most people will ever understand anything. But I am small. I weigh 140 pounds. Against a single opponent, size does not matter if I strike first and strike correctly. Against many opponents coming from multiple directions, I cannot rely on speed alone. He paused. I need to learn how to absorb punishment. How to take a blow and keep moving. How to survive when the first strike does not end the fight. Rollins studied him for a long moment. You want me to teach you how to get hit? Yes. That's not something most people ask for. I am not most people. The gym had grown quiet again. The few remaining fighters had drifted closer, drawn by the conversation. Their earlier fear was slowly giving way to curiosity. They had never heard anyone talk to Earl Rollins this way. Not with arrogance, but with a calm, matter-of-fact certainty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond ego. Rollins rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. His eyes moved from Bruce Lee to the door, then back again. These people who are coming for you, he said. What happens if they find out you've been training here? What happens to my gym? To my fighters? Bruce Lee did not look away. That is a risk, he admitted. I will not pretend otherwise. And you expect me to take that risk for a man I just met? A man who put one of my guys in the hospital? No. Lee shook his head slowly. I expect nothing. I'm offering an exchange. What you do with that offer is your choice. Rollins was silent for a long time. Then he stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. He walked past Bruce Lee without a word, moving toward the back of the gym. He stopped at a heavy bag hanging from a rusted chain, placed one scarred hand against the leather, and stood there for a moment, his back to the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Come back tomorrow. 6 in the morning, before anyone else gets here. He did not turn around. And bring that speed of yours. You're going to need it. Bruce Lee returned the next morning at exactly 6 o'clock. The gym was empty, the heavy bags hanging motionless in the gray light filtering through the dirty windows. The air was cold, carrying the faint smell of cigarette smoke and old sweat. Rollins was waiting in the center of the room. He wore no gloves, no hand wraps, no protective gear of any kind. His feet were bare against the concrete floor. His eyes tracked Bruce Lee as he entered, watching the way he moved, the way he held his weight, the way his gaze swept the room before settling. Close the door, Rollins said. Lee did. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They simply stood there, 15 feet apart, studying each other in the silence. Before we start, Rollins said, I need to know something. Ask. Yesterday, when Vic spat on you, you could have walked away. You could have let it go, but you didn't. Why? Bruce Lee considered the question carefully. His expression remained calm, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of something older. Something that had been carried for a long time. Because I've walked away before, he said quietly. When I was younger, when I thought that restraint was the same as wisdom, I let insults pass. I let men believe they could disrespect me without consequence." He paused. "And every time I walked away, they followed, they pushed harder, they took more, because they believed my silence meant weakness." Rollins nodded slowly. He understood. He had seen it himself, in the ring and outside of it. The way certain men interpreted mercy as an invitation. "So yesterday," Lee continued, "when your fighter spat on me, I made a choice. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of necessity. Because the men who are coming for me, they are watching. They have eyes in places I cannot see. And if word reached them that I allowed myself to be humiliated in a boxing gym, they would come faster. They would come harder. They would believe I had already been broken." The words hung in the air. Rollins absorbed them in silence. Then he walked to the far wall, where a row of wooden staffs leaned against the concrete. He selected one, thick, solid, about 4 feet long, and tossed it to Bruce Lee. Lee caught it without looking. "Today," Rollins said, picking up a staff of his own, "we find out what you're made of. Not how fast you can hit, not how precise you can be, but how much you can take when the world hits back." He settled into a stance, the staff held loosely across his body. "Because those men who are coming, they're not going to stand still and let you pick them apart. They're going to swarm you. They're going to hurt you. And if you can't keep moving when the pain starts, all that speed won't mean a damn thing." Bruce Lee adjusted his grip on the staff. His weight shifted slightly, settling into something that was neither a boxing stance nor a traditional martial arts posture, but something in between. "I understand," he said. Rollins smiled grimly. "No, not yet, but you will." He moved without warning, faster than a man his size should have been able to move. The staff whistled through the air, aimed not at Lee's head but at his ribs. The first lesson had begun. The staff caught Bruce Lee across the ribs. He had seen it coming, had read the shift in Rollins' weight, the rotation of his shoulders, the trajectory of the blow. But he did not block it, he let it land. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent a sharp bolt of pain radiating through his side. He did not fall. He did not stumble. He absorbed it, redirected his weight, and kept moving. Rollins struck again and again. Each blow was calculated, precise, not meant to injure but to teach. To show Bruce Lee what it felt like when the body took damage and the mind had to keep working anyway. For 20 minutes they moved through that empty gym like two shadows engaged in a conversation that had no words. The crack of wood against wood. The dull thud of impact against flesh. The sharp rhythm of breathing. When it was over, Bruce Lee stood with his hands on his knees, sweat dripping from his face onto the concrete floor. His ribs ached. His forearms were red and beginning to swell, but his eyes were clear. Rollins lowered his staff and studied him. "You didn't try to win," he said. "No. Why?" Bruce Lee straightened slowly, wincing at the pain in his side. "Because today was not about winning. It was about learning what my body can endure." Rollins nodded. Something in his expression changed. A softening around the eyes, a grudging respect that had not been there before. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "And the day after that, until those men of yours show up." They trained together for 19 days. Each morning before dawn, Bruce Lee would arrive at the gym. Each morning, Rollins would find new ways to test him. Not just his speed, not just his technique, but his ability to think through pain, to adapt when the plan fell apart, to keep fighting when every instinct screamed at him to stop. And each morning, Bruce Lee got better. Not just at taking punishment, but at something deeper. At understanding that combat was not a performance. It was a negotiation between the body and the will, between what was possible and what was necessary. On the 20th day, the men came. There were 7 of them. They arrived at Bruce Lee's school in Oakland just after sunset, when the streets were quiet and the windows of nearby buildings had gone dark. They did not announce themselves. They did not issue challenges. They simply walked through the front door. Bruce Lee was alone. He had sent his students home early that evening. Some instinct, some premonition, had told him that tonight would be different. He stood in the center of the training floor, barefoot, wearing a simple black shirt and loose trousers. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was older than the others, perhaps 50, with gray streaking his temples and the calm, measured posture of a man who had done this many times before. "You were warned," he said in Cantonese. "You did not listen." Bruce Lee did not respond. The first attacker came from his left, a young man fast, trained in the traditional ways. He threw a straight punch aimed at Lee's jaw. He never made contact. What happened next would be debated for years. The accounts varied. Some said the fight lasted 3 minutes, others said 5. Some claimed Bruce Lee fought with a staff, others insisted he used only his hands. A few whispered that he moved so fast, so fluidly, that it seemed less like combat and more like water flowing through broken stone. But on one detail, every account agreed when it was over, Bruce Lee was the only man standing. He was not unmarked. His lip was split. 2 of his ribs were cracked. His left hand was swollen and would later be revealed to have a hairline fracture across the 3rd metacarpal. Blood ran down his forearm from a gash he did not remember receiving. But he was standing. And the 7 men who had come to silence him, to teach him a lesson about tradition, about respect, about knowing his place, were scattered across the floor of his school like broken furniture. Some were unconscious. Others groaned softly, clutching damaged limbs, staring up at the ceiling with the hollow eyes of men whose certainties had just been shattered. The old leader was the last to fall. He lay on his back near the doorway, one arm bent at an unnatural angle, breathing in short, shallow gasps. Bruce Lee walked over to him and stood there, looking down. "I was warned," Lee said quietly, "and I listened. I listened to every word. I understood exactly what you intended to do." He crouched down, bringing his face closer to the old man's. "But you did not listen to me. You did not understand what I've become." He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty. The night was silent. "Go back to the men who sent you," he said without turning around. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them that the next time they send 7, I will send back 7, and if they send more, I will send back more. This ends when they decide it ends, not before." Earl Rollins heard about it 3 days later. He was sitting in his office, going through the week's receipts, when one of his fighters came in with the news. A friend of a friend had been there, had seen the aftermath, had counted the bodies being loaded into cars and driven away. Rollins listened in silence. When the story was finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then he laughed. It was a low, quiet sound, not mockery, not disbelief, but something closer to wonder. The wonder of a man who had spent his entire life in the world of fighting, who thought he had seen everything there was to see, and who had just been proven wrong. He never told anyone about those 19 mornings, never spoke of the young Chinese man who had walked into his gym and asked to be taught how to suffer. But years later, when Bruce Lee's name had become legend, when the films had made him immortal, when the whole world knew the face and the voice and the impossible speed, Rollins would sometimes sit alone in his empty gym after closing time. He would turn off the lights, sit in that same metal folding chair, and listen to the silence. And he would remember. He would remember a young man standing in the doorway, silk jacket stained with spit, eyes as calm as still water. He would remember the sound of the staff against ribs, the sharp exhale of breath, the way Lee kept moving no matter how many times he was struck. He would remember the question he had asked himself that day, standing in the center of his gym, watching a stranger dismantle his best fighter in 4 seconds flat. What am I looking at? For 20 years he had wondered, and now, watching the tributes pour in from around the world, watching the old footage play on every television screen, watching millions of people mourn a man they had never met, he finally had his answer. He had been looking at the future. He just hadn't known it yet. The spitting incident had lasted 4 seconds, but its consequences would echo through martial arts history for generations. Because in those 4 seconds, a professional boxer learned that there were things in the world he didn't understand. A gym full of fighters learned to question their assumptions. And a young Chinese man named Bruce Lee learned that sometimes the greatest respect comes not from avoiding confrontation, but from ending it so decisively that it never needs to happen again. "You hit first, weak actor." Victor Galindo never said those exact words, but they captured the spirit of what he believed that day. That movie stars were pretenders, that real fighters could always tell the difference between performance and reality. 4 seconds later, he learned he was right about one thing. There was a difference between performance and reality. He had just been on the wrong side of it.